Welcome to Cozy Noah Vibes, where we relax, unwind, and prepare for a peaceful night's sleep. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name's Noah, and I'm your host. Tonight's story, written by Alicia and read by me, Noah, is a follow-up to a previous episode called A Lazy Summer Day in 1982. Decades ago, waking up to a heavy snowstorm was always filled with anticipation. To find out if school was canceled, we'd listen to the radio or watch the news on TV. For many, there's no fonder memory than the magic of a snow day. And perhaps the greatest gift of any snow day is that it happens spontaneously. Tonight, we will journey back to the 1980s to experience one of those perfect snow days. We'll follow Heather as she enjoys many special cold weather activities with friends and family. But first, let's just take a moment to ensure we're calm, settled, and ready for rest. Gently bring your awareness to your breathing, steadily watching and feeling the movement of air in and out of your nostrils and lungs. Your breathing is like a natural anchor, a constant that you can center your focus on whenever needed. This practice alone is somewhat meditative and offers an opportunity to find calm, to reset, and to relieve the body and mind of anxiety, stress, or any other challenging sensations within. So, let's spend another minute or so breathing deeply, with your awareness placed on that calming airflow. And now, it's time to begin our story. Continue to relax and unwind as we take a sweet journey back in time for a day of wintry fun. Heather was awakened by her favorite top 40 song playing softly on the clock radio. As she slowly shook off the grogginess of sleep, she felt a pang of regret the song had turned on when it was almost over. Sure enough, the radio DJ began talking over the last refrains of the music. Heather, still mentally adjusting to the idea of getting up, tried to focus on what day of the week it was. Just as she was realizing it was Thursday, she heard the DJ announce he had a list of school cancellations. Heather's eyes opened wide, and she sat up in bed. Reaching for the window, she pulled her blue gingham curtains aside. To her delight, the backyard was a winter wonderland. Fervently hoping that her district would be included in the list of closings, she scooted up to a seated position and hugged her knees close under the quilted bedspread. Heather lived in a district that began with the letter T, so she always had to wait with bated breath while the announcer went through all the canceled areas in alphabetical order. When the DJ finally said the words he had been waiting to hear, she threw the covers aside, nestling her feet into her slipper socks. She scuffed across the room and opened the door wide. She crossed the hall, and without knocking, she pushed open her younger brother Jason's room and whispered, "We have a snow day." Jason popped his head up and let out a quiet whoop. Then the siblings grinned at each other. No words were needed to pass between them. They knew they were in for some spectacular winter fun. Heather descended the stairs in her flannel nightgown, eager to tell her mom the news. Turning into the kitchen, she crossed the bumpy yellow and brown linoleum floor, recalling to her mother that school had been canceled. Her mom looked up from her magazine with a long hesitant expression, nodded her head, and said that she had already heard it on the local TV news station. Then she turned back to her magazine, taking a long sip of coffee from her brown ceramic mug. Without looking up again, she said, "You can eat your breakfast in front of the TV if you want." By now, Jason had joined them in the kitchen. He and Heather pulled open the walnut-colored cabinets that contained the breakfast cereals and each grabbed their favorite box. Heather liked the puffed cereal, whereas Jason preferred the sugary flakes, helping themselves to generous pours of milk from the fridge. They each grabbed a spoon from the cutlery drawer. Then, they walked carefully down the 2 steps to the carpeted family room, their mother urging them not to spill. They rolled their eyes humorously at each other. Heather set her bowl down on the coffee table and walked over to the TV to turn it on, rotating the dial with a satisfying click. She stopped at a kid's morning show she and Jason used to watch when they were younger. The host wore an orange sweater and was talking to a puppet. They watched for a moment, but then she kept turning the dial until it landed on a game show. People were participating from the audience and winning prizes like household appliances and vacation packages. Heather didn't usually get to watch game shows until after school, so it felt quite decadent. With the roar of the game show crowd in the background, she spooned her milk and cereal into her mouth while gazing out the window. The entire yard had taken on a shapeless quality, with all the objects buried in mounds of snow. The branches of their maple tree stretched upward into the sky, extending into the pale gray light that always came with daytime snowstorms. The flakes were falling heavily, but there was no wind. The result was a lacy coating that delicately stacked up on every branch. When they had finished their cereal, Heather and Jason looked at each other with a grin. They knew they had more exciting things to do than watch TV. Putting their bowls in the sink, they picked up speed and clambered up the carpeted stairs to their bedrooms to put on clothing suitable for sledding. Heather was too old for snow pants. Any 10-year-old worth their salt would be on the sledding hill in jeans, moon boots, and a ski jacket. She knew her mom was going to make her wear a hat, and though she felt a little uncool doing it, she would comply. Before she left her room, she pulled on 2 layers of white knee-highs to go inside her boots. They would keep her feet a little warmer. Downstairs, they stood in the tiled entryway of the house, pulling on their boots and donning all their outerwear. Heather took her coat off the hook on the wall and slid both arms into it. She still had a lift tag hanging on the zipper from the time her parents had taken them to a nearby ski slope last year. Looking down, she grabbed the zipper and listened to its familiar z-ishing sound as she pulled it up past the rainbow stripe on the torso of the jacket and closed it at the neck. Once that was done, she reluctantly put on her hat, wrapped the matching scarf around her neck, and retrieved her mittens from her pockets. Heather watched Jason as he zipped the legs of his snow pants down at the ankle. Peering at her own feet, she confirmed that her jeans were idly tucked into her boots. She was ready to go. Heather chided herself for always forgetting that you can't really turn up with mittens on. Hastily removing one mitten, She pulled the door open. She and her brother nearly gasped with delight as the wall of wet, cold air met their faces on the front steps. Their mom had opened the garage and put their flyer sled in the plastic toboggan in the driveway. Carefully descending the front steps, they made their way over to make their choices for the day. Heather took the yellow rope that pulled the flyer. Jason grabbed the toboggan. They were off to the sledding hill. They walked in silence, feeling that the trudging of their boots on the fresh snow was a pleasant barrier to conversation. Luckily, nothing needed to be said. Their destination was a familiar one, and they knew that every kid in the neighborhood would be arriving there shortly. Jason's face smiled at her out of the small circle of the drawstring in his hood. Sticking his tongue out, he caught several fat snowflakes. With a look of careful consideration, he pointed out that this would be the perfect type of snow for building a fort. There were already high school kids with snow shovels making the rounds. They knocked on doors and were gladly greeted by adults who were happy to pay them a few dollars to shovel their driveways. Some people liked to wait until the storm stopped before they shoveled, but Heather's dad had always said it was better to keep clearing the snow than to let it pile up. It always seemed to Heather, though more tasks, that it was a shame to make the snow go away even sooner than necessary. Arriving at the best neighborhood snow hill, they saw they were not the first. Kids ranging in age from about 8 to 16 were in the various stages of going up the hill, shouting at their friends from the top, and arriving in a cloud of freezing powder at the bottom. Heather heard a voice calling her name and turned to see her friend Michelle, who was dragging a plastic saucer sled up the hill behind them. Heather let her friend catch up with her, while Jason continued to the top. The snow was still coming down heavily as they made their way to the crest of the hill. Their boots sank deep into the mounds underfoot, which had already grown to be 6 or 8 inches. Heather huffed and puffed. She reflected on how amazing it was that a person could get so warm just from climbing a hill in such cold weather. It was certainly worth the work, though. The hill was wide and allowed numerous kids to launch their sleds at once without crowding each other. Heather and Michelle perched their sleds at the top of the incline and then counted backward to 4, 3, 2, 1. Then they pushed off, Heather steering the flyer expertly down the hill. She tried to remain focused on their course, but couldn't help but take note of Jason and his friend building a bump in the snow to launch over. She came to a gradual stop near the bottom, laughing and spraying powder as she tipped the sled up in front of her. The sledding hill grew busier and busier with neighborhood kids, and after a while, Heather found herself getting hungry again. It was probably time for lunch. She tugged at Jason's sleeve to let him know she was headed home. She, Michelle, and a couple of other friends returned to their houses to get warm and refuel. Heather opened the front door and peeled off her wet layers in the entryway, hanging them up on the wall hooks and leaving her boots to dry in the corner. She could hear her mom rustling in the kitchen, and her mouth watered at the smell of tomato soup simmering on the stove. "That smells great," Heather commented as she walked in and saw her mom turning over a grilled cheese sandwich in the frying pan. Her mom smiled as she filled up 2 bowls and set them on the kitchen table. Jason came barreling in, banging the door loudly as he entered. He kicked off his boots with much less care than Heather had, tossing his coat on the back of the kitchen chair. Their mom turned and gave him a stern look but didn't say anything. They were all in too good of a mood to be bothered by minor things like a little mess. The warmth of the soup was a wonderful contrast to the wintry weather. Heather dumped her sandwich into the bowl and watched the cheese stretch as she took a bite. After lunch, she knew she would want to go back outside and build a snow fort with Jason. She had visions of a whole community of snow dwellings, maybe a little army of them, in their front yard. Before she could get started on that idea, the back door opened, and her father stepped inside. He was flushed with the cold but smiling. He was up for a drive to the store for some hot chocolate and marshmallows, he asked. Heather and Jason cheered and ran to get their boots back on. This snow day was just getting started, and they planned to make the most of every moment.